Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I'm here for my LCS week number 7 overview and analysis video. It's the final week of the LCS regular season. By the end of the video, we will know all 6 teams that have officially qualified for the playoffs that will be playing for a chance to go to Worlds to represent North America. We will know our first 2 teams that have been eliminated from 2024 that won't get to play another series the rest of the year, and we're going to have a clear idea of where a lot of these teams end up standing. I'm very excited. I hope you guys are as well. If you want to know my thoughts on the LCS leading into this week, check out the playlist up in the iCard right now. Of course, that's every single week of the LCS done in the exact same format that you are getting in today's video. If you're interested in my thoughts on how we got here and where I think these teams are going into the week, that is definitely a great place to start, but certainly not required viewing because today we're going to be talking about basically everything I need to say before we jump into the playoff coverage. There will be a video that goes up tomorrow that's going to be my playoff preview. I'm going to be doing all of my regular season awards in that video, MVP, Rookie of the Split, all of the All-Pros, as well as previewing everything you need to know about the playoffs, and so that's all going to be coming out tomorrow. Do not worry about that, but today we are just going to be covering week number 7. So if you're excited, let me know down in the comments section below. But without further ado, let's get right into it. If you are new here, what we are going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each individual series, and at the end of the week, I will be giving my player of the week and my dud of the week to kind of tie everything into a nice, neat little bow. We will not be updating my personal power rankings as per usual. At the end of the video, we will be talking at least a very little bit about the playoff bracket, just showing off where I think teams might land in a broader sense. Again, more specific details are going to be coming in the video tomorrow, but without further ado, let's get into the action from week number 7, the final week of the regular season. A couple of teams are actually playing for their playoff lives over the course of this week, so quite a bit on the line, and we kick that off with, you know, a pretty predictable series between NRG and Team Liquid, with Liquid being able to pick up the 2-0 series win. They absolutely dominated this series. It wasn't even remotely close. Liquid actually does complete it. They go 7-0, they go 14-3 over the course of the regular season, and they go undefeated. This is a really huge thing for Liquid. It wasn't entirely surprising after they beat Cloud9 last week. That was really always going to be their toughest challenge towards the back half, but Energy has honestly kind of always had Team Liquid's number in terms of some of these matchups. Obviously, Palafox into APA is pretty notable historically for Palafox basically always winning it. It's been APA's worst matchup as a professional by a lot, even going back to before they were LCS players. And so to see APA come out, play Corki 2 games in a row, and look awesome, it's certainly encouraging. And we'll talk about Palafox, who was completely disconnected from the rest of his team here. But Liquid is just dominating across the board. Broadcast game player of the series to Impact. I think a lot of that is definitely the hype machine being behind Impact right now. Not that I'm complaining about that. I think he's been excellent for Team Liquid, but he is clearly the player that has taken over the role of, oh, let's just praise him at every chance we can get. I think that is severely underrating how good Jan was in this series. He was the easy choice for player of the series, at least in my opinion. He was the carry, and Impact played well. I'm certainly not going to try and, tear that down. I've been praising Impact all year long alongside the broadcast, but we've seen a couple of player of the series go Impact's way that I'm just not entirely sure are, what I would do, and so this was kind of the last one for me in the regular season. Jan's going to end up getting it. The Ezreal was spectacular. We're seeing this champion really emerge as the best AD carry in the game at the current moment, or at least the most consistent AD carry, because it can be really safe weak side early on in games if you want to go that route, which is kind of becoming a lot more standard with carry-oriented junglers and AD carries in the mid lane. You want a bot side that can be a little bit more passive, and it can also carry team fights. It's not the same as like a Jhin or an Ashe that needs a little bit more team support in order to be as relevant on that weak side. Even something like a Misfortune is really just an ultimate in a lot of these late game team fights, at least at a high level. Ezreal kind of does a little bit of everything while staying safe in the early game, which I think is just a great package for a lot of these teams. And Jan obviously is a great Ezreal. This has always been one of his best champions, and so not surprising at all to see him do so well. I also really got to point out APA. Obviously, again, the narrative coming in is that Palafox has basically always been able to take him down when these two play against each other. That was not the case, clearly, in this series. APA very much came out on top in both games, and if there was a voodoo curse on him, it's very much been shed at this point. was awesome on the Lilia, and the Ivern Impact was very good. In the top side, Doklo was horrible in this series, and we'll get to that when we talk about Energy. Core JJ continues to be perfect as a facilitator for a lot of these more aggressive pieces on the team, even if he individually isn't standing out as much much as he would in his prime. Team Liquid is just firing on all cylinders. There's genuinely no other way to describe them right now. Everything is working for this roster, and they are clearly the best team in North America heading into the playoffs. And then for Energy on the other side, you know, people are talking like, oh, I wonder what happened to Energy, biggest fall off of all time, etc., etc. They always overperformed last year. I think going into this year, we all had high expectations because we thought the top side of this map could actually repeat its performance, and that's just not really been the case. I think FBI and Huki have at least been good in the 2v2. Like, people are still going to complain about them, and, you know, you see it all the time online that, oh, Ignar must have been the reason this team was good. That's absolutely not the case. Like, not to say that Ignar's a bad player, but Ignar's one of those players that plays up or down to the talent level of the players around him. He was not the one stabilizing this team. The real issue is that they've just lost all sense of cohesion in terms of their decision-making in the mid-game, and maybe that was Ignar, but by all accounts, Contracts was doing a lot of the shot calling last year, and a lot of that has just completely fallen off. Whoever you want to give dud of the game to, or dud of the series to, I think is almost entirely up to you. I'm going to give it to Palafox here in the mid lane because it felt like he was individually the most disconnected from the rest of his team. He got destroyed by APA in both laning phases, went back to the Yone versus Corki matchup in game number 2 after he just got destroyed on it. It just wasn't a good series for Palafox. He did not have a particularly good split. I think it was better than maybe some of his teammates. I think Dokla was definitely a bit worse. I think at times the bot lane was worse, especially in the late game, even if their laning was fine, generally solid over the course of this year, but Palafox needed to be better. He was such a major part of this team last year, and then, you know, Dokla is the other player that just was horrendous. I mean, 1-9-1 is pretty indicative of how bad he was. Impact is kind of popping off right now. Obviously, he's the favorite to win MVP, I think, for a lot of different people. I'm not spoiling any of my award picks, but he is definitely the favorite for, you know, most people to win MVP at the moment. Losing to him is certainly not the worst thing in the world, but this was a miserable performance, and he's given bad performance after bad performance. He honestly was just straight up horrible this split. One of the worst top laners in the LCS. Almost no signs of life. I think Contracts is getting a bit overrated. I think generally speaking, this is the same narrative, the same formula that we've seen from Contracts throughout his entire career, where the first couple of splits he looks really good on a team, and then as he stays longer, he just continues to get worse and worse and worse. I don't really know why that ends up being the case. He is, of course, one of those junglers that is a little bit more, you know, facilitating oriented, like a Tarzan. He's kind of like NA's Tarzan. That's kind of what I've always called him. I think playstyle-wise, that very much fits. He's very aggressive in terms of his pathing in the early game, but he does it on champs like Sejuani and Maokai and things like that, or at least that's where he's most consistent. But it's just not working right now. He doesn't have lanes to enable, and that definitely isn't ideal. FBI and Huki, again, I think they've gotten a worse rap than maybe they've performed. I still think both of them can be good individual players, and they can be a good duo, I think, on a better team, but this team just has so much going wrong with them in terms of their macro and their decision-making that basically none of it matters. The individual performances have only recently just caught up to how bad the macro has been on this team, and that's really not a good sign that they are getting worse. And so Energy is Energy. I'm not surprised by this loss, and I'm not surprised by the Team Liquid win. Them going undefeated, especially after last week, is certainly not a surprise. I think they kind of had this one in the bag so long as they didn't fumble it here, and they certainly didn't. Yawn looked amazing. APA looked great. He's a sneaky MVP candidate, in my opinion. Umti looked pretty good. Everybody on Team Liquid is just kind of clicking, and again, if this team doesn't go back-to-back here in summer, I think a lot of people are going to be surprised. And then moving on to our second series of day number 1, and this one actually did have some direct implications on playoff qualification. It was Shopify Rebellion taking on 100 Thieves, and 100 Thieves is going to get the job done. This series was a lot closer than it probably was expected to be. I think 100 Thieves came into this as pretty heavy favorites. Not a lot of people were giving Shopify a lot of credit, but this team has played a lot better in the recent weeks, and generally I think they fit the meta incredibly well, with AD carries in the mid lane being super common, AP carry junglers being very common. I think that there are just a lot of things that actually led to Shopify getting better over the course of this split. Boogie coming back in has obviously been a huge reason for that, but 100 Thieves was just slightly too good in this one, and it's off the back of their new acquisition, their newly acquired AD carry to come in and replace Meech, Tomo, in the bot lane, who is going to get player of the series here. 400 Thieves, he's played 2 series for this team, I believe, at this point, and he has dominated in both of them. He's looked so good so far in the LCS. This is honestly shades, in my opinion, of what he was for Dignitas last split, what he has been for DSG over the beginning part of this split down in the NACL. Tomo is like pretty clearly a top 3 or 4 AD carry in North America. I think at this point, I feel very confident in saying that, especially because players like Bvoy have really underperformed for the most part over the course of this split. Now, whether or not you want to think he's better than like some of those upper tier guys like Masu or Sven, obviously I don't think he's on the same level as like Jan and Berserker at this point, but, if you want to consider him in that upper echelon, I think that that's honestly entirely fair at this point with how he has performed, so you do have to give him credit for that. The Kai'Sa in game number 1 was solid, but really, he's getting this for the Xayah in game 3, where he was really good. People are going to look at this series, and I'm going to get ahead of this. I'm going to say this at the beginning. I'm sure that there are a lot of comments out there about, oh, how broken is Aurora, right? Like, oh, how dumb is this champ? This is the first series that we got her in the LCS. The first thing that I do want to say, obviously, I've covered this on the channel already in basically every other region, including the NACL already here in North America, but this champion very much has her own flaws. Yes, she is a pick machine, and she's very dangerous to play against in the late game, but her early game is horrible. Like, it's genuinely awful, and it's specifically really awful in the mid lane. She really has no good matchups in the meta at the current moment, and she gets completely outpaced early, unless you are just, like, awful playing against her. And even then, as long as you play safe, in the late game you don't overextend for no reason, her pick potential, while scary, is not entirely unplay-aroundable, especially in pro play when you are going to be looking out for that. But the point I really want to make that I haven't made in the other regions, I didn't talk about this in the LCK or the LPL because it's not quite as applicable, but champions like Aurora, specifically when they're new, they're going to do better in North America and in, these other regions than they are going to do in the LCK and the LPL because players, quite frankly, just aren't as respectful. Their positioning is greedier. They're not quite as clinical in terms of, what they can and can't get away with. And so Aurora is just going to look stronger because players are, respectfully, a bit worse. And so you just kind of have to live with that. The champion's going to look busted when she's going against players that are actively making bad decisions. But, at the top level, as we've already seen in the LPL playoffs and in the LCK regular season, this champion is certainly not broken by any means. She's just strong, and I specifically think she's strong in the top lane and not so much in the mid lane, but I wanted to get ahead of that because I'm sure there are going to be a lot of comments on Aurora just generally throughout not only this final week, but the playoffs in particular, which I imagine we will be seeing her quite a bit in, so I wanted to get my 2 cents in. Again, I'm not trying to say she's weak by any means. She does so much in the late game, but her early game's very weak, and generally speaking, that pick potential can be negated at the very least, or at least neutralized to an extent if you are playing around her well. So I just wanted to make that point. I think at least for the first couple of weeks, it's going to dominate, and I think teams and players will eventually catch up to how to play against it. But that I do want to talk about Quid because he has been really good over the course of this split. I think he's honestly being talked about in a more negative light than he deserves. I get it that 100 Thieves aren't as good as they were in the spring split, at least in the regular season, being the clear number 2 team in the regular season. However, I really don't put a lot of that on Quid. I actually think he's been pretty good over the course of this split. He's definitely been the driving force for everything that 100 Thieves have wanted to do offensively in terms of trying to win games. He is still the player that they want to play through. I just don't think they're getting the same amount of consistent resources because the league in general has gotten better, especially the top of the standings. All 3 of the top teams are pretty darn good, and they're all scary in their own way, and so Quid just doesn't have the same kind of opportunity to be able to destroy games like he was able to have last split as the MVP, but he's still been very good. I think he's still been a borderline all-pro caliber mid laner. He definitely has had the resources to do so, and this was another series where I thought he was generally good overall. I think River has definitely not been as good, in my opinion, as he was in spring. I think generally the jungle talent is just really high right now, and if you're not able to win early as consistently, you better be one of the better team fighters in the league, and I think River, as this style of jungler that wants to facilitate his own laners, it's just not quite the meta for that at the moment, and I think he is struggling to an extent with that. He's always been a pretty streaky player outside of last year, and then Sniper, Ayla, they were fine here. The 100 Thieves didn't exactly blow me away. Shopify actually played this series rather well, and they've played basically all of the last few series rather well, but 100 Thieves fortunately had the best couple of players on the Rift, and that was enough to get them across the finish line. I say that, but that feels kind of disrespectful to Boogie in the jungle, who was awesome here for Shopify. He definitely deserves a lot of praise. That Evelynn game in Game 2 was unbelievably good. We're not seeing any Evelynn in any major region right now. I don't think I've covered Evelynn so far in 2024, and so to see it pop off as much as it did in that game number 2, very impressive stuff. Boogie obviously very comfortable in this meta. This team has completely turned around their talent level ever since he entered the team, but unfortunately the rest of the team not necessarily living up to that. I think the carry duo in particular really let this team down. Dud of the series for me is going to go to Insanity, mostly for that game number 3. I feel kind of bad because he was very useful in a lot of the other games. I just don't think that in that pivotal game 3, he was perfect on the Zeri, and that kind of ended up being the deciding factor. I think B-Voy was also kind of a letdown, and generally speaking, I don't think this Shopify bot lane has actually been all that good over the course of this split. They were really solid last split, B-Voy in particular. I think he was first team All-Pro on the broadcast. I wasn't willing to give him that because he didn't play the full split, and also I thought they were underrating players like Yon, and that aged really well, but so far, like, B-Boy has not been able to live up to that spring kind of performance that he was able to put on. So hopefully he can figure things out and maybe come back next year and look good, because it's just not looked nearly as good in summer as it did in spring. Some of that's going to be Zeyzal, who I just do not think has been good at all over the course of this year, but the rest of the team has gotten better. Boogie and Insanity have locked in for the most part. Boogie in particular has been a huge upgrade to Tomio. Fake God has been actually really good over the last couple of weeks, maybe not so much in this series, but I mean, go look at the last couple of weeks in terms of his performances. They've actually been really solid. There's a lot to like about what Shopify is doing. It was just too little too late. Sitting at 1-6, that means they are unfortunately going to miss the playoffs. There is no way for them to now make top 8. It means our playoffs are determined. You know, seeding is technically not locked in by any means, but Shopify, I think if they had made this change earlier, or perhaps even started the split with Boogie in at jungle, perhaps could have been a playoff team. They looked really interesting down the stretch, but it's not meant to be. 100 Thieves is going to get to 3-4, and they are going to qualify for playoffs. Depending on what happens later on in the week, they could get as high as the number 4 seed, which would be pretty good after this regular season. The record isn't really all that bad, and they are getting better. Tomo has upgraded this team, and I think Quid is locking in. If River can even remotely get back to some of the form he had in the spring split, this actually can be a pretty scary team early on in the playoffs. But then moving on now to day number 2 in our third series of the week, and this was the series of the week for basically everyone. 2 back-to-back ones of those for Cloud9, as we saw FlyQuest taking on Cloud9, and C9 is going to pick up the victory. This was going to be really telling for the playoff implications, obviously, because this basically determined the number 2 seed after Team Liquid won on day number 1, and Cloud9 kind of demolished this series. FlyQuest did at least try to make it interesting in game number 2. There were moments where things looked at the very least intriguing, but at the end of the day, Cloud9 was the better team by a pretty considerable margin in this one, and I think they really cemented themselves as the number 2 team in North America with this win. I think a big reason why this team looks so much better, I don't think it's just like obviously Thanatos coming in, that hasn't completely changed the complexion and the idea of what Cloud9 is. A big reason this team is better from what they were in spring and why they're able to close out games a little bit more consistently is just because their bot lane is back. It's actually good again, and that was really the biggest problem for me coming out of the spring split, is that both Berserker and Vulcan, quite frankly, were pretty bad. Vulcan in particular was really bad in the spring split. Berserker was just kind of a huge letdown. He was like an average AD carry, which is way below what he should be at this level. Both of them have bounced back in an incredible way. Both of them have arguably been the best players in their roles, especially in the second half of the regular season, and both of them deserve a lot of credit for this win here. Player of the series is going to go to Berserker for me, but it could go to either him or Vulcan, honestly. The Braum was also great and very important in these games. The Zeri was obviously just a little bit more noticeable, and I don't really know what it is. Maybe it's a meta shift. People are going to talk about Zeri coming back into meta and that helping Berserker a lot, and I agree with that, but Cloud9's just playing around bot lane a little bit more consistently. Their 2v2 has become so much stronger just without really a lot of intervention, and I think the confidence is just back for both of these players, and it's a necessity. That was the reason, in my opinion, that this team was underperforming so much in the spring split. I didn't put it on Blabber and JoJo, who I thought both played very well in spring. I don't even think it was really Fudge's fault up on the top side. People like to blame him for basically everything. He was the C9 scapegoat, and even if I do think Thanatos has been, marginally better, I don't think it's been by a lot. Fudge consistently was a top 1 or 2 top laner over the last couple of years in North America. Thanatos has been a top, 2 or 3 top laner so far this split, so I don't think it's out of the realm to say that Fudge would have done what Thanatos is doing right now, but it's Berserker and Vulcan that I think have emerged and really gotten back to what they should be, and that's unlocked what Cloud9 is as a team. And so, to me, that's the part that I want to focus on. As long as they can hang on with this bot lane, as long as they continue to play well, and there's really no reason to believe that won't be the case, then this is going to be a team that's going to compete near the top of the standings. They took a game off of Team Liquid. If they were able to win one more, they would be undefeated coming out of this regular season. And so, they are very close. I think they're a lot stronger than people are giving them credit for. I think JoJo had one of his better series in a while. He's kind of been the player that has been a little bit less noticeable over the course of this split. I don't think that's been all bad. I think sometimes he's just taken a backseat role, but his individual lane stats have gone down quite a bit. I don't really know what that's about. I imagine he will be fine going into playoffs, but it's not exactly been his best regular season. In fact, honestly, it might be his worst regular season, but that just goes to show how good JoJo has been over the course of his LCS tenure. Blabber has been awesome over the course of this split, very underratedly amazing, one of the best junglers in the league, and this is a really strong case to be like a first-team All-Pro caliber guy by beating Inspired, who I think a lot of people would say has had the best split of any jungler. I mean, Thanatos has been great, weak top lane pool, but he's done a very good job. overall Cloud9 just looks good at the current moment, and that's something you really weren't saying about them a couple of months ago. This is genuinely one of the scarier teams in North America, and the process looks good behind it. This could actually be a team that does something. And then for FlyQuest on the other side, you know, they're fine. Again, I've continued to keep them in this number 3 spot. I think it's basically the most locked in position in the LCS. They had a chance to really usurp Cloud9, get back to that number 2 role, be a team that I expect to make the finals, but I just don't know if that's their cap. I don't know if this team is in a position to do what they did last split, which is kind of be the most, you know, consistent high floor team that you're kind of looking for. I think Cloud9 and Team Liquid are both just better, and I think generally the league itself is just better. I think people have been talking and joking about how Jensen wasn't the problem on this team. I agree, Jensen wasn't the problem. Quad has come in and basically given you everything that Jensen was. I don't think that he has been better or worse than what Jensen was for this team. Maybe a tad bit less noticeable. Jensen was, in my opinion, really good in Spring Split, but I think this is basically the same FlyQuest team. I just think the LCS around them has gotten significantly better over the course of the year, and they've not necessarily evolved with them. Dud of the series for me is going to go to Inspired in the jungle. Just some critical mistakes on the Lilia in game number 2 that end up losing them. Some pretty pivotal fights. People are going to be very happy to point out when Bwipo and Inspired do not play well, because they are the quote-unquote villains of the league. I like to keep things a bit more objective. Inspired has been pretty amazing over the course of this split. Bwipo maybe not as much, but Quad, Masu, Busio, I think they've all played really well. They just kind of got outskilled in this one. Cloud9 is definitely the better team. There's really no other way to look at it walking out of this series, and specifically, I think this bot lane could be something that really struggles in the playoffs. I like Masu and Busio. I think that they are good, but I don't think they are great. I don't think they're elite, quite like Berserker and Vulcan or the Team Liquid bot lane, or, you know, a couple of other bot lanes that I think could make things interesting. There is a world in which I can imagine FlyQuest actually struggling in a best of 5 if they're not able to establish 2v2 pressure there. Add that on to the fact that I don't think Quad has been like a superstar in the mid lane. Bwipo is certainly worse than he was in the Spring Split. There are genuine, real concerns here with FlyQuest about whether or not they're even in contention to be a finals team, but you know, this should be a team that you are betting on to make Worlds. Everybody beyond this point, you know, below number 3, 4, and beyond, they all have gigantic question marks, and if one of those teams ends up breaking through, that would definitely be a surprise, so Fly should at least, you know, feel at least good about that, but Cloud9 definitely looked better. They are, for sure, the better team, in my opinion, right now, and it's really cool to see that, at least for now, they're starting to live up to some of the preseason hype they were getting. But then moving on to our second series of day 2 and our final series of the week here and of the regular season. And it's not really a banger. It's definitely one of the series of all time. It's Dignitas taking on Immortals. And Dignitas is going to pick up the 2-1 series win. Credit to Immortals. They are able to pull out a win here in their final series of the year, but they were already eliminated going into this one. They were eliminated last week after their loss. So there really wasn't a lot to play for here from Immortals, and Dignitas definitely took good advantage of that. A lot actually on the line for Dig in this one, because playoff seeding is very much up in the air in terms of how things went down this week. A lot of teams are sitting around 2-5, 3-4. Like, that zone was very much open, and with a 2-1 win here, Dignitas actually does a good job to secure themselves the number 4 seed. Now, that's not entirely too different to the number 5 seed. It's basically the same starting position, but it is side selection, so that is certainly something. But this team is just generally almost there. Like, it's very interesting to talk about them because they do a couple of things really well and a couple of things really poorly, and I think if they were to clean up on the things they do bad, then I think they could be really good. I think they could be just as good as a FlyQuest or even a Cloud9 if everything were to get cleaned up, or if these major mistakes that they have were to get cleaned up, but, you know, it just isn't happening. It doesn't really seem like the development has really come along for this team. They've not really gotten better over the course of this split, and it's been a bit frustrating to watch on that front, but one player I really do not think is at fault for this is Jensen in the mid lane. If there are 2 players, I should say, on this team that really are the ones that are carrying them across the finish line, I think both Jensen and Sven have both been pretty good over the course of this split. Jensen in their losses hasn't exactly been perfect, but most of the time in their wins, he's the one doing almost everything for this team. Certainly was the proactive piece here on the Corki in the back half of this series. Typically, proactivity and Corki are not 2 phrases that go together, but at the end of the day, Jensen's really good, and quite frankly, he's about as good as Quad. I know people are looking to make some sort of statement on whether or not Fly made the right decision by moving on from Jensen. Perhaps Quad is going to be better moving forward into the future, but at the very least, right now, I think they're basically the same player. Maybe Jensen was slightly more efficient over the course of this split, but Quad was definitely better in lane. However you want to quantify that, I think is really up to you, but Jensen actually was really good this split, just as he was in the previous one. Sven, was also the other player that you really had to shout out for just being good for most of this split and kind of the reason that this team was able to stay afloat during times where, Jensen wasn't playing well. Sven, I just thought was pretty solid. He's an AD carry that I really trust. He's never really had these major bad spots in his career, maybe outside of some of the TSM years where there were just some up and down performances, but really you look at Sven over the course of, his decade-long career at this point, and he's just been a good AD carry the entire time, and he continues to do that here. Isles has certainly been a bit of a question mark, really has not played the team fights particularly well, which is kind of important because that's the part of the game that matters right now, but he is still a very good 2v2 laner, which accounts for something. Spica and Licorice have certainly had their own problems. They've kind of been the more inconsequential parts of the team, or I should say consequential, but kind of in a negative way for the team. Spica has not been particularly good. I don't think Licorice has been particularly good over the course of this split, but they were both really good in this series. Spica was very much controlling the pace. I very narrowly gave him player of the series, and Licorice, by far the better top laner, completely obliterated Castle down the stretch in the back half of this series. So Dignitas at the very least looking good in their final series, but it is against the weakest team in the league, and so it's not exactly something to write home about. But for Immortals, just another year, it's the same result. I'm not going to try and sit here and say that I hope that this is their last year in the LCS, because that feels super unfair, but it kind of is fair with the results that this org and this team have put out over the time since they've come back into the league. Immortals has essentially been a complete nothing of an organization. If they've made the playoffs, which I don't even remember if they have, they've only made it once. And outside of that, it's just been nothing. It's been losing season after losing season after losing season. There's really nothing to talk about here. Castle's going to get done of the series, but really this roster was never good. Outside of their win in week 1 over Shopify, they have yet to be able to do literally anything. In fact, this win here in game number 1, that was their first game win since week number 1 of the summer split. Genuinely, they have just been unplayably bad. They've gone 0-10 before this series in their last 10. Technically, now they're 1-12 in their last 13 games. It's just awful. They suck. This org has failed to get better, and while some people are going to bail out some of the players on this team, I'm a lot lower on players like Tactical. I'm certainly a lot lower on a player like Ole. Masking Castle really didn't have that development. In fact, they got worse, which is just kind of the general trend with players who come to Immortals. They don't develop. The coaching staff and the system just surrounding this org never really works out. Armeo was probably the worst player in the LCS this year. There's just no good to say about them, and I know I try to stay away from being negative on this channel, but it's impossible to not be negative when you talk about Immortals. It just is the case. This team is bad, and this org is bad, and, with the changes coming next year to the North American system, all we can hope is that they are one of the teams that does end up getting cut from one of those LCS spots. But for Dig, they might be the other one, but regardless, at least for now, they are going to be heading into playoffs. They are in a pretty interesting position, and their team actually does have some upside that other teams around them I just don't think have. And so there is some reason to be optimistic about Dignitas, but I'm not super sold that they're going to be able to compete with any of the top 3 just yet. All right, and that is going to do it for my LCS week number 7 overview and analysis video, and for my regular season analysis here in the LCS. We've done every single week, and up on the screen, you can see the playoff bracket. We now know who has qualified for the LCS Championship. Shopify Rebellion and Immortals have officially been eliminated. Their years are done. They are done, at least for now. Shopify looks like they will be coming back next year. Immortals, maybe not so much. We'll have to see how things end up going, but for the 6 teams that stay alive, this is going to determine not only who ends up winning the LCS here in the summer split, but who ends up qualifying for Worlds to represent the LCS. So quite a bit on the line. You can see the bracket here. I'm not going to break it down too much, but it's pretty much what we expected. It broke down basically exactly as we anticipated. Team Liquid and Cloud9 are the 2 best teams in the league, and they get the buys in the first couple rounds. That's pretty important because it means they only have to win 1 series in order to qualify for Worlds. That's a pretty great spot to end up being in, so you got to be happy about that if you are those 2, but then you've got the, rest. You've got 3 through 6 all fighting it out here. All of them have a decent chance. FlyQuest obviously going to be favorites of those 3 to end up qualifying, but it's going to be interesting. Let me know what you think of the bracket, who you think got a good draw in round number 1, who you think got a bad draw in terms of matchups. Obviously, we will be covering all of that in the video that I post tomorrow, as I said, alongside my award picks for the regular season, so stay tuned for that, but that's really going to be it for the bracket coverage. Let's move on to my player of the week and my dud of the week here for the final week, week number 7. Player of the week is going to go to Jan, the AD carry for Team Liquid. This guy's just exceptional. Like, he is so good. He's so far and away the best AD carry in North America at the current moment. In my opinion, it's really just a two-horse race with him and Berserker, and Jan, I think, has really solidified his spot. Not only is he by far the best laner, 2v2, but his team fighting has come along so much, and he's actually able to make a ton of plays when it matters the most. He has developed into one of the scariest players in the entire league, and it's really fun to watch. Add alongside that the fact that he's got multiple MVP caliber players playing next to him, like Impact, APA has been awesome this split. Umti's a great facilitator. You got freaking Core JJ, maybe the NA GOAT, in the same lane as him. Like, this is a very scary team, Liquid team, with the development they've gone through, and I'm really excited to see if they can hold on. But honorable mentions here for Player of the Week, 2 other AD carries, pretty important role at the current moment. Berserker, the AD carry for Cloud9, Tomo, the AD carry for 100 Thieves. Both of them came in and really stepped up their games this week, and I think both are big reasons why I'm optimistic about these teams going into playoffs. Berserker, obviously, because of a bit of a turnaround from what his form was in spring, getting back to the norm, and Tomo kind of solidifying that he should have been in the LCS the whole time by getting brought back and really emerging here for 100 Thieves. So those are my 2 honorable mentions, but Jan is going to get my Player of the Week. And then my Dud of the Week is going to go to Castle, the top laner for Immortals. Just an awful final 2 games from him. Really just not good at all. I still think Castle could theoretically be a good player. Not on Immortals. Nobody is a good player on Immortals. It just kind of is what it is. He's got some interesting traits. He was really good in the Challengers League over in the LCK, but it just didn't translate into anything. So Castle's going to get Dud of the Week, Immortals is going to get Dud of the Year, and Jan is going to get Player of the Week for me. But that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We don't only post about the LCS. We're going to post about, of course, the playoffs as well, but all 4 of the major regions. That's the LEC, LCK, and LPL, as well as the NACL Tier 2 here in North America. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL esports, especially with Worlds coming up, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.